The year is 2047. Exactly 25 years have passed since the portals, nicknamed the Gates of Hell, began to open around the world. The world changed beyond recognition, and eventually humanity disappeared. Or rather was killed. Among billions of people, only one man survived. He was called the Dark Terror. When he walked by, people would shiver, and his gaze would make their hearts sink. But there was one man who didn't have an ounce of fear in him, only emptiness and pain in his eyes. He wore a long brown cloak, and his hand was missing a thumb. He had gray hair and a long beard that had long needed a trim. On his face was a huge scar he had gotten fighting a brutal battle. And his gaze was blank as if his whole life had been drained away. One day, Dark Terror and this man met in the middle of ruins remotely resembling a city. Dark Terror stuck his long sword into the ground. After which, he showed his trophy in the form of a wooden skull with a glowing right eye in it. Dark Terror got down on one knee in front of Namgung, bowed his head, and held his head out to him. Looked up at him and nodded in appreciation for a job well done. After which, our hero went into the nearest bar, which was on the street. Taking a bottle of red wine, he started drinking it straight from the throat. I remembered. There were rumors of a man who only hunted top-grade demons. Who would have thought they would turn out to be true? Dark Terror said. And what's all this about? He asked, looking at the wooden skull. It's too long to tell. You'll find out soon enough, Namgung answered him, wiping his mustache clean of wine. Just as suddenly, the wooden skull came to life and screamed, So, that mission is real? Yes, replied the man. After the extinction of mankind, whoever collects the 666, 666, 666 heads of top-class demons will be able to shake the timeline and turn back time. Namgung walked into one of the huge rooms that had thousands of demon heads, and all of them had eyes glowing with a red light. That head the Dark Terror had brought him was the last in his collection. The heads were talking to him. They were shouting, What an asshole! Are you out of your mind, bitch? You think you're gonna get anywhere with that? He looked at them, and just tried not to listen to what they were muttering about. Like change the future if you go back in time, one of the heads asked. I'll see my daughter, he replied in a quiet voice. That's it? Just for that? One of the heads asked. After which, he couldn't stand it any longer, and thrust his sword between the glowing eyes. That's why I put up with this hellhole for 25 years, he said. And don't expect them to sit idly by, said the heads. Phases, huh? He said. The 8 chosen ones appeared. They all had glowing eyes of different colors. What are you going to do with them? Heads asked. The ones who opened the portals and turned this world into a hellhole. And who came up with those stupid terms? The man said. Legendary quest, you have met all the conditions for regression. Even they are not omniscient, he said. All the heads began to glow, to emit lightning. He has collected all 666,666,666 heads, and the portal can be opened. The light was so bright he had to close his eyes. It looked like he was really getting the hang of it. This man turned out to be the only survivor on Earth. I'll kill anyone who gets in my way, he said through clenched teeth. Mission accomplished. Nexus activation. A bright yellow-red beam burst from the ground. Everything around was destroyed. And this beam reached all the way to the heavens. From hell to heaven. That beam was so strong, it was like anyone on the planet could see it. It worked. He was back in the past. He was young and handsome again. His blue eyes, dark hair, and taut skin were as marvelous as before. He woke up in his bed. He looked at his hands. They were the same as they had been 25 years ago. As soon as he realized he was back in time, he looked sharply at the door and ran to her, thinking of nothing but seeing his favorite daughter. After all, his dream had come true. He was about to see his favorite daughter. He opened the door and shouted, Somin! Daddy's little copy was still sleeping soundly in her bed with a nice blanket. He walked over to her and once again called out, Somin! 25 years ago, at this time in the world, was a complete apocalypse. All the houses were destroyed over high-rise buildings flying demons. Everything was burning and stinking of soot. It affected their house as well. It was hit, and he barely had time to grab Somin's arm, which weighed over the top of the house. She screamed, Daddy! Her eyes filled with tears of fright. My right arm is broken, and I can't even move my left arm, he said, holding his daughter with his last strength. His right arm was hit with arrows. God, please, even if I die, at least my daughter, he said. Clenching his teeth, he held Somin. He knew he would hold her to the end no matter what happened. From below, one of the demons suddenly started flying at them. Somin looked down, her eyes filled with tears, and then she saw him. Namgung started yelling for him to fly away and not to touch his daughter. But it was too late. The demon had consumed poor Somin. Her last word was, Daddy. His hand began to hold only his daughter's hand already. That was all in the past. Now Namgung would not allow such a horror. He walked over to his daughter, sat on his knees in front of her bed, put his hand to her head and began to cry. Salman spruced up her eyes and didn't realize what was going on, why her dad was sleeping. She got out of bed, but Daddy was no longer in the room. He walked out of the room and just stood by her door. Inside, he was just happy that he had gotten it all done. He dropped to his knees and said, "Praise God." He repeated it over and over again. He cried with happiness that his daughter was alive. "I know this happiness won't last," he said. "The day is coming when the gates of hell will open again, and the world will change forever and will no longer be the same. The world that everyone loved so much." He went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, took a bottle of water and drank it down. "I've lived alone for 25 whole years," he said. In his mind were thoughts of whether he could last in this hellhole, protecting Soman. But no, all doubts must be put aside. Namgung turned his head toward his daughter's room. He thought he heard something, but Somin was sleeping soundly and sweetly in her room with her face tucked into her pillow. "I have a duty to protect her," he said firmly and decisively, "even if I die trying to save her myself." He had obtained the status of magical powers, entry-level spirit magic. The spirit eyes were activated. He wielded magic, his hand glowing with a bright purple light. "My powers aren't gone," Namgung said in surprise, looking at his glowing hand. A spirit was watching him. He turned his head and saw a picture of his wife and daughter. "Sua, is that you?" he asked. The photo was on one of the cabinets in his apartment. Someone behind him hugged him. It was his wife's spirit that would protect and help him. It had been a very long time since he had felt such warmth nearby. Sua's aura was so pure and loved by Namgung. He didn't know why his strength came back to him. This may have been the result of crossing timelines. Or was it a regressor chip? On October 11th, 3 days later, the gates of hell will open again. But already 3 days before the opening, there were people who became aware of it. 8 prophets who were chosen by the 8 phases. They were the 8 battle stars, the chosen saviors of humanity, who progressed incredibly fast. Given what he remembered from his 25 years of life, he would be able to grab a lot of achievements and honors that were only available to them. It was deep into the night, with only a couple of cars driving on the streets, lights burning near the roads, and all was quiet. He walked outside in his long cloak, approached one of the underpasses and froze. Today is October 8th, 2022, just 3 days before the gates of hell open. That underground passage was the gateway to hell. "I'll take everything," he said. His attitude was determined and irrevocable, ready to do what he couldn't do 25 years ago. He went downstairs and there were various kiosks that were closed, for it was night. He was looking for something, going through hundreds of different stores. And so Namgung raised his head and turned his attention to one of the signs. It said, "Name Compatibility Predictor." That's probably where he should be. He went to the door and it was unlocked. He opened it. It was very dark and cold. How strange, he reflected, looking into the far reaches of the basement corridor. No one was supposed to come today, but he could hear some rustling in the distance. How could someone show up? Someone from the darkness asked in surprise. Namgung saw a man sitting on a chair. "Sounds like you weren't expecting a visitor," he said, looking at the oddly male salesman. "What brings you here?" the salesman asked. "I have come to acquire something," he said, whereupon he shouted a secret spell, "Yaksha!" Everything around me began to glow with lightning bolts of purple and blue. The ground crumbled from beneath his feet. He fell under a pile of rocks. Namgung lost control of his body. He was completely immobile. Because of this earthquake, a thick curtain of dust rose up, and nothing could be seen through it. Namgung realized that he was definitely not expected here. He waited until the dust mist cleared to see who had done this to him. He heard the sound of an approaching object. By the sound of it, it was someone very large. Namgung still couldn't see who it was. He only saw the silhouette of some monster that grabbed him by the throat and lifted him up from the ground. It had horns, and it was very selenium. "Who the hell are you?" this monster asked Namgung. Its face was creepy, long fangs, a glowing eye, and ears like a goblin. Namgung answered him, "I want to pass the test of vice. They take place here, I know." The beast that seized him was a demon named Yaksha. "Or am I wrong?" Namgung interjected. "Who could have told you about this place?" Yaksha asked in surprise. Here, Yaksha slowly begins to realize that this isn't just a boy off the street. "Wait, that's impossible. They said from above that the selection process is still going on," he said. "That's the way it is. That's why I'm here," said Namgung. Yaksha was still wickedly perplexed by the situation and kept hearing what this guy wanted from him. "I want to get the seat of the chosen one, so I came in advance," said Namgung. In fact, they all knew. They knew that Namgung had shaken the time loop. You're in for a real treat, you loon, Yaksha said, pointing his index finger at him. Have you really decided that thanks to regression, you can do whatever you want? The demon said threateningly. This place is a chessboard created by the higher phases. If you mess up their cards, you'll only make them angry, he continued. Put your hand away. It stinks, replied Namgung, thereby insulting Yaksha. Yaksha was more than a little angry and started shouting at Namgung. But in the meantime, he got out of his snare. Wanted to cut off your claw, but it seems my body isn't ready for that yet. Well, I don't have any special runes yet, so it makes sense, said Namgung, dusting off his cloak. 3 sharp swords stabbed into Yaksha. You creature, he shouted. You're wrong. It was the phases that made the regression possible. It's part of their plan. Make them angry? You think such a creature cares about us? Namgung said. Yaksha swung at him with a sprint, his both eyes glowing with yellow light. Enough talk, he shouted. Yaksha looked up at the ceiling, and one of the lamps in the hallway came down on him. His face turned into an omelet from such a blow. Do you need your head for decoration? Don't you understand what it means to be a regressor? Namgung asked him. That means I've fulfilled the condition, he continued. Meanwhile, the demon lay on the cold floor, squealing in pain. At my hand, 6666666 upper-class shitheads have fallen, he said, showing his might. The Yaksh race feeds on the fears of other creatures, but I'm the one who's scared now, the demon said. At this rate, Yaksha will die from his own power. And then that formidable giant Yaksha turned into a little weirdo as tall as a 3-year-old child. Great. I have 2 things to tell you, Namgung began, explaining everything on his fingers. For the demon had not only shrunk in size, but had also become a child. 1. Until the gates of hell open, members of your race will not be able to kill humans. That will be the rule, he said. The second is that the reason Namgung was looking for Yaksha was because of a certain convolution that the demon possessed. An envelope? Yaksha interjected. Also, don't even think about trying to kill me when the gates of hell open. Namgung threatened him. Yaksha second rank Kure, said Namgung. How do you know my real name? He asked in surprise. Oh, you and I are quite close, he said with a smile, looking at little Yaksha. Yaksha was utterly bewildered by what he heard, because he doesn't remember anything, because it will be in the future. No way, you mean I was your servant or something, the demon said angrily. Yaksha cast incantations, lifting a magical pouch that was larger than himself. Namgung activated his shield and the bag disappeared. It was a sturdy steel shield. It was needed for every mage's initial defense, but something confused Namgung about this shield. He realized he had come to the right place. It's a store reserved for vices. There he could buy this shield, the Sword of the Sunstar, or the Emerald Staff. Yeah, they're crazy. Getting 1 head per monster, I'll never be able to buy anything, said Namgung, looking at the goods provided. Okay, a little later, and 1,000,000 heads will be changed to me, he said. And what's there to look at for so long? You won't be able to buy anything, said Yaksha. Namgung decided to purchase the Yaksha scroll after a long choice. It was a wise decision. But then he said to Yaksha, Give it to me. Yaksha was astonished at such a request from the stranger who had taken his power. Are you out of your mind? How am I going to give it to you? Said the demon. Namgung had read in the description of the scroll that it was a friendship scroll, meaning Yaksha could give it to him as a token of friendship. Why on earth would I give you anything? Yaksha said angrily. You're stabbing me with irons, punching me in the face. You're not getting anything from me, sadist, the demon shouted. Namgung pulled out a sharp blade from Yakshi's hand that had been embedded in him a long time ago. Then he pulled out the other 2 blades. That must have hurt a lot. What are you doing? He asked. I pulled them out for you, replied Namgung. And which of the 2 of us is the demon? Yaksha asked. Namgung took out 2 wads of money from his pocket and threw it at the demon with the words, Here you go. What is it? He asked. It's 20,000,000,000,001. You be my friend, I'll give you another 80 million, said Namgung, thus finding a compromise in their situation. But Yaksha didn't like this kind of talk. He threw that money back at Namgung. You know very well that these papers will lose their value in 3 days, said the demon. Trust me, you'll need them, Namgung told him. 2 years from now, this money will save your life during the night of pitch blackness, Namgung explained to him. Night of what? The demon interjected. Trust me to know far better what will soon become valuable and what won't, said the lad. One must realize that money will always have a price, even when the gates of hell open. Yaksha began to hesitate. He thought to himself, Is he serious? In the human world, money decides everything, but for us it's nothing more than paper. What if you're lying to me? The demon asked. You'll have to take my word for it, said Namgung. You may listen to me, you may not. All I know is that 2 years from now you'll be biting your elbows over your refusal. Only it will be too late, he explained. You're bloody evil. Even worse than those snakes, Nagi, said Yaksha. Namgung knows he's rude, angry, but it's all for the good of his daughter and their shared bright future. Yaksha gave him the coveted scroll. He asked the boy, "What will you do with it?" The demon took the money and listened to Namgung's answer. He replied that he would record the events. "I've had enough of this. I hope you know what you're doing." Yaksha turned around and walked from the place. Namgung opened the scroll and started writing something in it. It glowed with a blue light. Using the scroll, he broke the mirror that was the portal. It's time to meet the very select few from the phases everyone talks about. Namgung's eyes were startled, his pupils shrunk, and his eyebrows rose. Yaksha was scared too. He shouted, "Oh no!" They both saw something in the distance, and apparently it was something not small. Namgung was determined, his gaze changing to a belligerent one. All they saw was a huge red bloodshot eye. The look was mad and crazed. The demon and the boy saw a road that led into total darkness. Namgung walked confidently, while Yaksha was a little afraid of the unknown. Yaksha turned around, clenched his lips in fear, and squinted to scout something in the valley. "Why are you following me?" Namgung asked the demon. "Just go where you are going. I will only witness how painful a death you will die," he replied. "May I ask?" Yaksha asked. "What?" Namgung reluctantly replied. Yaksha, furrowing his brows, said, "Suppose it is true. The reason you know about the test of the prophets, and even the language of the runes. Memories from your past life, let's say. Right now you're trying to steal the privilege of being a prophet, let's say," he continued. "So?" Namgung asked. "What about the prophet himself, then? Originally it should be him here. Do you two even know each other?" The demon began to question. Yaksha didn't understand to the end how Namgung would just steal a comrade's privilege. Wasn't he ashamed? They heard Chui Huisu's ghostly howl. He looked like a madman. Red eyes, dark hair, and a creepy necklace around his neck in the shape of a demon. An incomparable entity, one of the 8 battle stars. He seems to be the leader of all demons. He is the master of hundreds of resurrected monsters. He's practically immortal. He was on par with the strongest of stars, Alec. But for people, he became just another piece of garbage that had to be gotten rid of. After all, he was a real psychopath. He was feared by the local children, women, and even some men. To resurrect monsters, he needed spare parts, so to speak. Chui Huisu experimented with still-living people to get good materials. "It got to me too," said Namgung Yaksha. "Not at all. You're a scumbag," the demon said with a surprised look at his almost friend. It was then that the realization came to Yaksha who Namgung really was. The tamer of the 7 snakes. This man is a regressor, an assassin, who blew the heads off 666 high-level demons, he shouted out. "So that's who flipped our game board," said the demon. "But he doesn't think Namgung is a prophet anyway. Why don't you test me yourself? I'm much better than your Chui Huisu," he said. Staring into the pitch darkness, Namgung saw a dark red spot with a narrow pupil like a reptile. And then Namgung flashed a memory from the past. It was that very day. He remembered the day he had lost the most precious thing he had. His somen. Different images from that day popped into his mind. But something was wrong with those memories. He felt something touch him. It was a spirit. The touch was very familiar and even native. He realized it was Sua, his wife. Namgung realized that the regressor who had broken the time loop was his follower. He got down on one knee to jump high for a powerful kick. "Think what you say," he said and made a slash with the blade. Yaksha was in complete shock. His eyes and mouth opened maximally. "Oh, horror!" he shouted out. "I'm not your follower," Namgung said menacingly after his accurate punch. The red eye began to scream and erupt. Apparently the blow was where it needed to go. "What a surprise," said the eye. Namgung was angry with him and was determined to fight. The eye wondered how a simple guy could have such power. "Just as I thought, even though he's a superior creature, he doesn't know everything," Namgung thought to himself. "It's a consequence of regression. Maybe that's his reward for the dedication he showed in trying to survive hell." At the snap of the strange creature's fingers, they froze. He had long black fingernails and a gold bracelet on his hand. Everything around him lit up in purple, bright flames. Yaksha stood in utter horror at what he saw. Namgung caught the gaze of some creature. It had cat-like yellow eyes. The Lord was sitting on the rocks. Apparently she is very strong. "I asked where you got it from," asked Namgung. "Chui Huisu, the prophet you have chosen," he continued, walking toward the demoness's throne. "You must voluntarily hand her over to me," said the lad confidently. It seemed like a rather interesting thought to him. There was a huge white serpent crawling near the throne. Getting closer, Namgung discerned 3 snakes. They had red eyes. It was the exact eye that got hit earlier. It was sitting on a throne that was built on turtles. On the throne sat the Lord of the 7 Serpents. He addressed the lad. "You deserve to have me listen to you. If you've achieved that, you may have gotten the sun and moon witness as well." "I thought it was only a useless achievement," he said. The Lord was deeply moved that Namgung overcame this obstacle and came to him himself. But unfortunately, the Lord has already made his choice of prophet and his decisions are absolute and irrevocable. "No, it's not," said Namgung. "He wants to change history and completely flip the chessboard." "Do you even know the regression conditions?" Namgung said. "What?" the Lord asked. "That means I'm the only survivor, and the one you picked isn't," the guy explained. "Each of the chosen prophets died 25 years ago. It was brutal, and a long time ago. I'm not here to beg for the position of the chosen one at all. I'm here to give you a chance," Namgung said. "If you don't choose me, that's okay. I can bring victory to other higher beings," explained Namgung. "Namgung will also decide that the prophet the Lord chooses will be dead at his hands." "Oh, this is too much," Yaksha said quietly to his friend. "My prophet, are you threatening me?" inquired the Lord seated on the golden throne. "I can kill you here and now," the Lord said, looking at the fire. "If you think of threatening higher beings, what chance do you even have?" "Why would I choose you?" he asked. "Only Namgung has a real shot at beating Reelin. According to the rules of the game, higher beings cannot kill me," said Yaksha. "Although I was clueless when the gates of hell first opened, I am the only one who survived," Namgung told the Overlord. "I guarantee I won't let you down this time either," Namgung said with a smirk on his face. Such determination and confidence in the words of an ordinary lad pleased the Lord. Namgung heard strange familiar sounds. He looked down and saw a guy there. Chui Huisu was sitting there. "What the? Where am I?" he asked in confusion at what was happening. "Chui Huisu," Namgung asked. "Do you know me? Who are you? And how did I end up here?" he asked. From the sky, a huge red dragon stepped straight at Chui Huisu, crushing him. "I will change the prophet's choice," the Lord said. It was cruel but necessary for Namgung. The dragon's hand took the body back into its portal, and Namgung looked up at the Overlord. And that very moment, the Lord of the 7 Serpents recognized Namgung as the new prophet. A magical sign appeared under Namgung's feet. It was an ancient rune spell. After that, an ordinary guy became a snake prophet. His privilege was to access the snake treasure. Now he can make up for his dream and change the course of history. Together with the Lord, they traveled to the serpent treasury. They came to a triad of poisonous doors. There was a silver door, a gold door, and a copper door in front of them. "Although the only door I can open for you is the copper door, you can take anything you want from there," said the Lord. "So this is the hell we're going through. Is it just a carnival to you guys?" Namgung asked. "We are not your guys. You can call me Yor," said the Lord. "The Overlord is still in the early days. He needs to use every means possible." They managed to open the first brass door, and there was a bright white light. "My knees are trembling at the sight of them, and they continue to chatter like nothing happened," Yaksha asked himself in surprise. The door in front of the little demon locked. Now he doesn't know how his friend is doing. He then crouched down on the cold tile in the hallway, waiting for the 2 men. But then suddenly the door opened. A bright white light could be seen from it again. Yaksha was already fast asleep at this point and didn't even hear it open. Namgung came up to him and said, "Come." Yaksha got up from the tile and went with him. They walked through another portal together and arrived at the Yongchan trading firm. "Namgung, may I ask what you've been doing inside for so long?" Yaksha asked. "Picking an item," he said, looking at his hand. His magic intensified, it turned black and red. It was the headdress of the monarch Leoric of legendary rank. It is the helmet of the greatest king in history. It gives great power, but charges for sins. I've been wondering myself what gear he'd choose, but that thing is completely useless to a living person. "Why her?" shouted Yaksha. "As expected, you have such good taste." "Ha ha," laughed the demon. "Kayuryo, take out your pouch," said Namgung. Yaksha broke into a sweat at those words. "What? But you have no heads," he said. "I have them," Namgung replied, and pulled out a bag with 100,000 heads. "Did the Serpent Lord give them to you?" Yaksha asked in surprise. "Aha, Yor gave them to me," he said. "Look, usually if he gives you something, he'll ask you 3 times as much later, even for the most trivial things," Yaksha explained to his friend. "I know that," he replied. "And how are you going to pay for those 100,000 heads?" the demon asked fearfully. "You won't," said Namgung. "He says Yor owes him, so he just pays, that's all." He is worried that Namgun might target other prophets because he is a regressor. But the overlord still put forward his test. Now Namgung must perform something equivalent to a regressor feat, something along the lines of killing 66666666666 demons. A scroll with a red seal and fire of legendary rank appeared in front of Namgung. It must be from the overlord. Namgung opened this scroll. His eyes were surprised and frightened. This was the first assignment, a hidden assignment from the overlord, added to his tasks. What is he doing there? Thought Yaksha, staring at Namgung with a frozen stare. Why are you stalling? I'm sure I told you to get the pouch, he said. Yaksha started looking for a pouch. I need the best sword for the amount of heads I have, at least of a rare rank, he said. Yaksha found a couple swords, but Namgun didn't like them because of the many letters in the titles. You can't expect anything good from long stories. Namgung chose a beautiful black and red sword called Head Off Shoulders. And for change, he asked his friend for some scabbards or a sling. Yaksha had one lying around. And you're just going to give it to me like that? Namgung asked. Just like you said, he replied, holding out the harness to him. Fusing an item with a long description is such a headache, really, Yaksha said, rubbing the back of his head. Plus Yaksha considered Namgung his friend, and friends are supposed to get a discount. Namgung sent the sword to his inventory and asked, What time is it? 3 o'clock in the afternoon, replied Yaksha. Then why are all the stores closed? Namgung inquired. It's just that there is a barrier around this area, said the demon. They stepped out of the underpass into the street. Good robot, Curio. Now I won't be late, what a relief, said Namgung. But instead of Yaksha, there was some man standing beside him. What? Are you in a hurry to go somewhere? He asked. I thought so. Since he bought the sword, he's definitely up to something, thought Yaksha to himself in the form of a man. Yaksha thought, is he really going to go after the prophets? I have to pick up my daughter from school, Namgung said with a smile on his face. Yaksha didn't know he had a daughter and was in complete shock at what he heard. Class was just about to end and Namgung hurried towards Somin's school. There were 2 days left for the opening of the gates of hell. Namgung spent the whole day with his favorite daughter. They went shopping together, buying things for themselves at fancy stores, playing their favorite video games on the PlayStation. Somin would try to win Daddy over, and he in turn would try not to give in. It was just a small island of peace in anticipation of the devastating chaos they were about to experience. Dad, isn't today the day you were talking about? Somin asked. Namgung nodded at her. Somin folded her anxious backpack and asked, Are these survival supplies enough, do you think? I bought them with my pocket money. Did you really believe what I told you? Namgung asked. Naturally I believed it, replied Somin. You're my daddy after all, my daughter replied with a smile outside. They held hands, and Namgung realized that he was not alone in this gray world, and his daughter was the only thing he was fighting for, and would go all the way. They came to the city cemetery called Daejeon. The day was surprisingly sunny today. Namgung approached one of the graves. It was the grave of his late wife Sua. Salute, Namgung said to one of his soldiers. Captain Namgung, said the soldier leaning his hand to his temple. We finished our service 100 years ago after all. Anyway, long time no see Manhwa, Namgung said, clapping his old friend on the shoulder. And you haven't changed at all, little brother. You look like you're ready to return to duty tomorrow, he replied. Come on, said Namgung with his head down. While Manhwa was taking a drink from the vending machine, he asked Namgung, How is Somin? Somin was sleeping soundly in the car at this time. That's right. We're on the outskirts of Seoul right now. She must be tired of grieving. I'm sorry for not visiting for so long. I should have come as soon as... said the friend. Nothing. I let her sleep on purpose. After all, today is going to be a hard day, Namgung said. I hope it's not because of me, right? Manhwa asked. Namgung explained to him that there was a reason why he had chosen this particular place to meet. They sat together on a bench, and then Namgung looked away and turned to his friend with a serious expression. Manhwa took a sip of black coffee and held his breath. I have something to tell you, Namgung said. He looked at his friend with a look that made it clear this was going to be a serious conversation. Imagine the world ending today. Would you believe that? Namgung asked. After hearing that, Manhwa spit out his coffee out of shock. Come on, bro. You dragged us out to the outskirts for a joke like that? He laughed, but Namgung was not in the mood for jokes. I wish it was just a joke too, Namgung said sadly, looking into his coffee glass. Manhwa was sweating profusely. He looked at his friend and realized that he wasn't joking. He was serious. It made him feel more and more scared. Abruptly something changed. There started to be some black highlights everywhere. It was morning, but everything had gone dark. Darkness engulfed the world. "What is this? What's going on?" Manhwa asked. "The sky has turned dark green." "Call 119 soon! What is it? Help!" he shouted. Manhwa was consumed with panic at what was happening. He looked at Namgung and said, "Brother, we need to leave soon." And then Manhwa's eyes widened still more from shock. He looked to the right and saw there the... Namgung took out his magic sword called Head Off Shoulders. It was glowing with a bright red light. Manhwa took a couple steps away from his friend. He didn't understand what was even happening to them right now. Namgung's eyes changed their color to red. He looked into the distance and said resolutely, "I'll kill every last one of them." The city was attacked by demons, goblins, and similar monsters, and there were a lot of them. All the people started panicking, running, screaming help, rescue. For demons, it's a treat for the ears. They love fear, chaos, and screaming. Manhwa tried to get Namgung away from there, shouting to him that it was time to leave, but Namgung would be there until the end. The demons were already on their way to Namgung. He turned to his friend to have the last word. "Let's both survive this time," Namgung said to his best friend as he said goodbye. After saying that, Manhwa became even more afraid for his friend. He shouted, "Namgung!" to go with him. Namgung shattered the demon with one sword strike. It turned into a green, slimy slime. A goblin's head was lying on the ground. "What? How?" the friend asked. He had so many questions, but very few answers. "Manhwa, please go get Somin," asked Namgung. "What are you up to, little brother?" he asked. Namgung turned around, looked at him and said, "Please do as I say." Taking a deep inhale and exhale, Manhwa put his hand to his temple and said, "Aye, sir." He turned around and quickly ran to the car to wake up his friend's daughter. "Be right back," he said. At this time, the goblins began to attack the people. Their red eyes horrified the people. Namgung had only ever blown the heads off these monsters despite their vast superiority in numbers. He froze and looked up at the sky. It had gotten brighter and greener. What could it be up there? There was a huge green eye in the sky, with a pupil like a serpent's, and lightning and thunder erupted from it. The demons began to fall from that eye in a waterfall. There were thousands of them, maybe more. He couldn't handle them all alone. People were terrified. They didn't know where to run, where to hide, and when it would all end either. Namgung remembered his conversation with Yor. He said, "Since you have become my protege, there is something you should know. From now on, you can command the life force. If you suddenly wish to save someone, be prepared to give someone else's souls in return," said the Lord. He also advised Namgung to be selfish, for that is the way of the protege of the Snake Lord. No matter what Namgung does, he cannot escape the stigma of being a hypocrite. But he needs strength even if he has to bear the cross of a hypocrite. "You may have forgotten, but can I borrow your power in this life as well?" the boy asked. Namgung drew his sword tighter and spoke these words. "I call upon you by right of the strongest in these lands." They were the defenders of the fatherland. Namgung told them to appear before him and help save the people and the world. The souls of the dead began to fly out of the graves. They were different people. All the souls flew to Namgung's aid. They enveloped his aura and saturated themselves with power. He felt the power of all the soul defenders, and now he was ready to fight all the creatures. Level 2 soul detection activated. Friendly spirits around him resonate with him. Level 2 spirit eyes are also activated. The memorial spirits had risen to Namgung's call, and now they were inside him. He can now use Level 2 soul summoning. The number of souls that can be summoned exceeds Namgung's limit. The defenders have awakened from beneath the earth and are coming to the aid of a guy who wants to save the world. Each soul has become a warrior with a mask of steel. They don't remember who they were, but they know what they have to do now. They have approached Namgung and are ready to serve him, bowing the knee before him. The demons continued to mercilessly attack the city and kill ordinary people. Meanwhile, Manhwa and Somin walked from the car to her father. Somin hung on to him for she was still asleep. Is little brother really dealing with them alone? He asked to himself. He looked at Somin and thought to himself, and just how can she sleep peacefully in this hell? She's not hurt, is she? Manhwa almost approached his friend, and then he looked up at the sky and saw an endless stream of demons straight from the sky. There were no longer thousands of them, but tens or even hundreds of thousands. He had no idea how they could survive today. One of the goblins attacked him and Somin right from the top. It was unexpected. He had his friend's daughter in his arms. He didn't know what to do. But then Namgung's army came to their aid. They chopped the goblin into 2 pieces. He turned around and saw his friend. A smile of hope and belief in victory appeared on his face. "What's going on here? Who are these people?" he asked. I'll explain the details a little later. In the meantime, take this sword, replied Namgung, holding out one of the swords to Menuhun. What's that for? He asked. Namgung said that there were still plenty of goblins and Chui Menhun here. Time to remember the forgotten kendo skill. Can you handle it? He asked. I promised my teacher that I would not take the sword in my hands again. But now it's for the sake of saving people, replied Menhun, looking at the sword Namgung was holding out. Master, I'm sorry. Forgive your worthless student. Hear me, blade of hell! He shouted and plunged his sword into the ground. Listen, what's that sword called? Menhun inquired. Why aren't the police coming? I don't want to measure here, were the cries of people who were trying to survive. People climbed up the high wall. One mother was also able to climb it, but her son stayed at the bottom. She tried to go after her son but was stopped by another man who said, You'd better stay back, citizen, or you'll die. My son is in there. Let me go, she shouted. A goblin approached the crying boy from behind with his spiked bat. Menhun managed to save the little boy and cut down that vile green goblin. Still, his hands still remembered all the skill he possessed. Run to mommy, he said to the boy. Menhun continued to fight heroically and demonstrate masterful sword-wielding. Namgung watched his friend fight and thought to himself, My strength can't be displayed openly yet. That's why I'm trusting you to be the crowd favorite. In his past life, Menhun was the leader of the resistance, the warrior guardians. More specifically, Chui Menhun's sword Gortai. But it remains for Namgung to lead the army into battle and remain in the shadows of this fight, safeguarding his daughter's life. Menhun is a masterful fighter and defeats all evil that approaches him. His sword movements are just a dance, not a battle. Swinging around, he hits the goblins right in the head, leaving nothing alive of them. It was the last green monster, now dead and lying with its head chopped up on the ground. Menhun was famously tired after such a workout. Looks like I can finally take a break, he said to Namgung, who approached him. But then they heard some loud footsteps coming from the goblin vent. Not all of them yet? We've dealt with all the goblins, shouted Menhun. Here he was, the one Namgung had been waiting for the most and for whom he had been saving his strength. It was a giant green goblin with a necklace around its neck made of 6 fangs. It was a goblin warrior. In his grimy hand was a makeshift sword made of iron, and he tried to swing it at Menhun with it. But Menhun couldn't be defeated simply like that. He sprang up from the ground, picked up his sword, and started a fight with this mutant goblin. His eyes were filled with aggression, anger, and madness. Adrenaline was running high, and there was no turning back. But the goblin was stronger. With his sword, he fell Menhun to the ground. He fell to the ground, dropping his sword from his hands. It was his first fall, but not a loss. After that, the goblin turned around and walked in the opposite direction. Namgung came up to him and said, Your bones are intact, I see. Then you'll do fine. What the hell was that? Why did he suddenly turn around and walk away? Menhun asked. I think he's headed for the memorial, Namgung said. Memorial? Menhun asked, getting up from the ground. The memorial is a place chosen by the goblins for offerings to their leader. They intend to set up the memorial tower as their personal base. If they don't take them out, they'll multiply like cockroaches. Doing that to the memorial tower? What freaks, Menhun said, aggressively determined to win. And how do you even know this information? He asked. It's not the first time I've heard it, replied Namgung. Not the first time what? Menhun asked in surprise, to which Namgung replied, To live. God, how did I not realize? You're living for the second time, that's nothing. Look, you must be bored. Let's make this quick, Menhun shouted, smacking himself on the forehead. Stop shenanigans. Our problems won't end with these critters. To prevent them from breeding, we have to kill them, said Namgung. The memorial tower looked really creepy. There were bonfires, a bunch of goblin giants. In order to win this war, Menhun and Namgung need to kill their ringleader. Then they can stop it all. Namgung knew that the goblin leader was the strongest opponent in existence and would not be easy to kill. They sneaked over to one of the fence walls, and there they were able to peek at the proceedings. Looks tough, which is more than you can say for the average greenhorn, said Menhun. He has a knack for sorcery. He's followed for a reason, said Namgung. What about Soman? A friend asked. I've put her to sleep for now. She won't be in the way for sure. Don't worry. I'll call the spirit soldiers to help us, answered Namgung. You mean dead? Menhun asked nervously. Yes, let's get rid of the goblins first, he said. Menhun still has a lot to be surprised about in the near future. A serious battle awaits them. The goblin was already waiting for them at the memorial tower. He held his sword in one hand, and an army of goblins stood around him. But then the goblin's face twisted sharply at what he saw. He was confused and just froze in place. Namgung threw it right at the head of one of the other goblin's swords, flying at him with insane speed and force. He hit the bullseye, or rather the monster's right eye, which made it twist in maddening pain. He screamed something in his goblin tongue. Namgung rushed to meet him to fight a duel. He was determined to win. He had the advantageous timing, as the goblin held onto his battered eye and was a bit lost in space. Holding one eye with one hand, the other goblin swung sharply with all his might at the boy. But since he could only see with one eye right now, naturally Namgung was able to dodge the sword strike. He activated the stingers of the scarlet wasp. 2 sharp stingers appeared in his hand. And while the goblin stood still, Namgung embedded those 2 poisonous stings into his neck. His veins immediately enlarged, began to throb, then turned purple. He screamed terribly in pain. While the goblin was immobilized from the wasp's venom, Namgung shouted to Manhwa, "Now!" He scattered, jumped very high, and swung his sword with all his might. Manhwa's eyes turned white. He put his sword to the goblin's neck to cut it off, but it wasn't as simple as they had assumed. "Wait, what? I can't chop it up?" Manhwa shouted out. A wicked smile appeared on the goblin's face. Manhwa removed the sword from his neck and took a couple steps away from him. The green dude was really pissed off. He started yelling something in his own language and was ready to attack the guys. "Does he have some kind of super strong muscles?" Manhwa asked Namgung, who was trying to get a lift from the ground. "By the way, your darts came in handy," Manhwa remarked. "Where did you get them?" he inquired. "In the subway on Iljiro Street," he replied. Manhwa started to backtrack. "Sure enough, that busy neighborhood. I was just about to get myself an automatic nose hair plucker. Will you show me the way later?" But Namgung was angry and asked him to pack up, for they were still in business. It's about time they dealt with this monster and saved the world and all of humanity. The goblin swung his sword very hard that it made a twist around itself. It almost knocked Namgung off his feet. He pulled out the now 3 poisonous wasp stings from his inventory for better results. He then hurled all 3 stingers towards the goblin to knock him down and immobilize him. They hit him in the heart, causing the goblin to scream like a madman. Hopefully, the poison will go deeper this time. The poison fell him from his feet. You could see his veins fill with poison and kill him. "I'll see it through this time!" Manhwa shouted and rushed toward the goblin. He finally succeeded in chopping off his head. He and Namgung are a good team. "Wow, his bones are so hard his arm hurts. Good thing my biceps were tougher," Manhwa said, adjusting his right shoulder. "Don't let your guard down. We'll go after their leader now," Namgung said as he looked at the severed head of the goblin. He moved closer to the tower to discern the entrance inside or where their leader sat. He looked up and seemed to find something up there that must be where they should head. Behind Manhwa stood some man in a cloak. His face could not be seen. He wielded strong magic. "You found him?" he shouted out happily, looking at his little brother. When he turned back, he saw this leader standing behind him. One of Namgung's warriors had attacked him, but the ringleader was stronger, of course, and the defender turned into pieces that scattered around. Just as Namgung thought, these souls are fragile and won't last long. 2 of the 3 spirit soldiers became available to him. Manhwa ran to attack the ringleader, shouting, "Hey, you bastard!" Swinging at him and jumping, the ringleader fought him off with his magic and pushed him to the ground. Now we saw the face of their leader. It was just an ordinary goblin, but unfortunately terribly strong. Manhwa flew backwards a few meters away from him, barely surviving such a powerful magical strike. He flew back to the memorial tower itself, hitting his head on the stone. It was a hard landing. "What the hell is that?" he asked. "It's a shield. Not the coolest skill, but it's rare enough at this stage," Namgung explained to him. "Then what should we do?" Manhwa asked. "Break it by using a little more force," replied Namgung. But then Manhwa had a question for his friend. "Where else would I get this power?" Namgung had another way to get more powerful and stronger than this. "Let the sword do all the work," Namgung advised his close friend. "I don't get it now," said Manhwa, picking up the sword Namgung had given him. "It's a cursed object possessed by a spirit," Namgung explained, asking to be careful with it, but confident in his actions. The most important thing, Namgung told his friend, was that this sword should never be let out of his hands. The 2nd-level spirit eye was activated. The sword entered its power. Manhwa lit up with a red light. The goblin saw something happening to one of the guys. It was some kind of black magic. He shouted something in his language and was ready to attack Manhwa. Greenthorn summoned his army of goblins and ordered them to attack them. They proceeded to attack Manhwa and Namgung, bats in their hands, red eyes, and sharp teeth. But Namgung was ready for this attack and was serious. His eyes read the death of the goblins. He took out a silver demon hunter's blade from his inventory, after which he sharply hurled it towards those green monsters to hit them in the head. This blade shattered into thousands of small pieces during its flight. Thus it was like a bomb. It exploded, and all the goblins standing near it burst into flames. "I can't buy you more time, Manhwa. It's up to you now," Namgung told him. Meanwhile, Manhwa was aggressively determined to defeat this ringleader and save the world. There is a fusion with the executioner's soul that is bound to this sword. Manhwa's eyes turned bright scarlet. He was not like himself at all. The executioner's spirit that had possessed Manhwa was hungry for blood. He began to look like a black shadow. He was like a black serpent or a powerful hurricane that sought a leader. Manhwa flew towards the goblin like a bullet at a crazy speed. When the goblin saw this, his eyes showed fear and confusion. The guy's eyes were crazy. Whether that good guy was still in him, or if he had become just a killer. The ringleader tried to reflect his yellow lightning magic, the executioner's magic in the guy. But the guy was already unstoppable. Watching from the side, he looked really creepy, and I couldn't even believe it was him. His eyes emitted a red beam, but the leader's magic was also strong. The goblin had put up a shield of yellow crystal with his magic, but how long would it last? The shield didn't help, and Manhwa broke through it with his red sword to make it not difficult for him. Manhwa's eyes read madness and desire for his opponent's death. In addition to breaking the shield, it hit the goblin right in the heart, making him squeal like a piglet. Victory. He had crushed the leader of the Greenhorns and was now returning to his body little by little. But you can't wash away the soul of the dead man in you. Namgung looked up to the sky to see a sign. The eye of the goblins that had been in the heavens for a bit began to dissipate and move away from their world. Rays of sunlight began to be seen through the eerie green clouds. The warrior defenders had finished off the last goblin that was in this town. The sky became light blue. The warm sun shone, which warmed with its rays, and everything was good. The leader of the goblins was defeated. The darkness was gone, and there was peace on this planet. The high people rewarded them with special chests. There were 4 of them, and each looked different. Some were wooden, some were iron, some were silver, and the 4th largest was made of leather. "Bro, what was that just now? Where did the chests come from?" Manhwa asked. "You defeated the main monster," said Namgung. It was time for Manhwa to receive his reward. All the chests opened, glowing white from inside. Inside was a goblin leader necklace, a goblin leader trophy in the form of a skull with rubies, and a bracelet. "Wow, cool stuff. You sure you don't want it, bro?" Manhwa asked as he put the bracelet on himself. "No, you need it more," he replied. But there was still one chest left, the biggest one. It glowed green. In it, they found the heart of the Goblin Lord. The rarity rank of this heart was the highest in rarity. This is the heart of a goblin wizard, which grants the ability to cast sorcery. "Now that's a good one," Manhwa said, opening his mouth upon seeing the green heart. "Well, if you're clueless about magic, not really. And you and I are just one of them," said Namgung. Namgung thought in his head, "When the next gate of hell opens, we need to catch the middleman and then sell this trinket at a high price." He put the heart into his inventory. But there's a problem. This is a special reward and can only be used by the recipient. It requires a search for magic-prone subjects. Namgung began to search for such a subject to use the given reward. "But this is strange. Neither I nor Manhwa have a talent for magic," thought Namgung as he looked at the crystal heart. The search is over, and the target has been found. Magical potential is being tested. A blue light of magic appeared from Namgung's hand. She was testing who would be suitable for this role. But the thing he feared most happened. The magic flew in the other direction, away from Manhwa and away from him. Magic recognized his favorite daughter Somin. Turns out she has a predisposition for magic. Namgung was at a loss for words. Sweat began to run down his temple and his eyes were open with shock. "What?" he said. "Somin's level of magical potential is legendary, a level the world has never seen before. Who knew that Somin had a predisposition for magic?" But Namgung couldn't have known that, because he had lost it after opening the gate. Somin wasn't just talented. She had a legendary rank with the prefix Supreme. It showed that his daughter was special and had her own mission. This is definitely surprising. But is Somin also destined to get his hands dirty in blood? Namgung asked himself. "Brother, you don't necessarily have to make a great magician out of her, do you?" Manhwa inquired. "Honestly, even us adults have a hard time fighting monsters," he added. Manhwa believed that even if the world turned into hell, children should live happier lives than adults. Somin began to awaken little by little from the deep sleep her father had sent her into. Wiping her eyes after a nap, she began to regain consciousness and rise from the ground. She sat down on the tile and her first question was, "Daddy? Oh, and Uncle." She was glad to see her loved ones. Dad and Uncle were happy to see her, their smiles never leaving their faces. "Oh, Soman, you've grown so much since we last saw you. Would you like an airplane like the old days?" Uncle asked. But Soman has long since stopped being a child. She doesn't yet know that the future of humanity lies in her magical power within her. When she looked around, she saw one ruin instead of the beautiful city of Seoul. "What's going on here?" she asked. The picture around her shocked her. She couldn't believe it had happened after all. There were dead bodies of goblins and regular humans lying near the forest, with fire burning in some places. "Didn't you say that we will go through all obstacles together by all means?" Soman asked her father seriously, to which he could not answer anything. "Isn't that why you told me everything?" she asked, turning around and looking into her father's eyes. Namgung could only beg his daughter's forgiveness, for she is the dearest thing he has, and he will always protect her until the day he dies. They heard soft small footsteps coming from their left. A small hand pulled Soman's arm from her purple sweater. The boy who approached them asked them for help. This is the same boy who was saved by Manhwa. "What is it?" Soman asked. The boy, through his tears, stretched his hand to his left to point and say, "My mom." Unfortunately, his mom was killed by monsters. She was lying with the rest of the dead people on the battlefield. The boy cried so loudly and bitterly he couldn't believe that he was now an orphan. Simone came up behind him, crouched down and hugged him tightly to comfort the poor man in some way. Manhong remarked that the girl was just like his brother, just as brave and strong. But Namgung replied, "No, she got that from her mother. I'm weak. Because of my fear, I tried to shield my own child by locking her in a cage. Isn't that natural?" Namgung said sadly. "You are her father after all," said Manhun, thus reassuring his brother. He was doing as he saw fit purely out of good intentions. Soman suggested that her dad and uncle take this boy who was orphaned with them. But Namgung replied, "No, there will be special shelters soon. He will be safer there than with us." He always acts with a cool head. The daughter still tried to convince her father otherwise, for he had no one else left. Namgung was always stubborn and made residual decisions. "Being alone is the worst," she used to say. Soman knew perfectly well this feeling of loneliness, for her father had already abandoned her once when her mother went to heaven. Before him came the realization of his past actions. Memories and sadness consumed him. Behind Namgung, a magical portal opened, from which the Lord of the Seven Serpents emerged. She said, "See? What did I tell you? The guy who controls death wants a quiet life." "Come on, that even sounds lame," he said. Namgung turned around and saw his old acquaintance Yor. Soman, on the other hand, saw him for the first time. He praised his prophet. "But you have done well. You got rid of the goblin leader. The plan was for them to build a citadel before midnight and fill the city." "Why this conversation? Aren't you disadvantaged when I'm active?" Namgung asked. "Of course I did," but the narrow-minded upper class objected. "They don't like that you used dead people before the carnival even started," said Yor. Namgung didn't understand what was wrong with using available powers, and asked whoever said that to tell them to go fuck themselves. "Nah, they're right, aren't they?" he replied. "Why is that?" Namgung asked. "Because it's against the rules. You controlled the souls of patriots by appealing to their sense of duty, didn't you?" said the Lord. "So what? So what if it's the rules? If it works, then I'll use everything to win," said Namgung. "Ha ha, I knew you'd say that," replied Yor. That was why the Lord of the Seven Serpents had come to offer a compromise. "A life for a life. Since you use the spirits, you'll have to pay for it," Yor said. "The rules of their world require an equal exchange. This may have been the Lord's own miscalculation, so Namgung may be limited to only one life." He pointed his finger at that boy in tears who had lost his mom during the battle. Soman hugged the boy tighter to keep him from dying. "You don't need him anyway," he said. He offered to kill him now before he became a burden to Namgung. But he didn't like the idea. It wasn't a compromise or the right decision for him at all. When Soman realized what the Overlord wanted to do, she shouted out, "What are you saying?" She had already become attached to the boy and couldn't let him go to certain death. Angry at the Seven Serpent Lord's request, Soman dragged her fist across his face. "Who are you to decide who lives and who dies? You snake," she said. "You little rat," said the Lord, his eyes turning bright orange. He's no ordinary demon after all. Yor had cast Soman away from him with the black magic of the strongest. It flew so far away that it crashed into one of the walls, causing a thick column of dust to rise. Soman was hit very hard. Blood was running down her temple. The Lord held her by her throat with his strength. She was gasping for breath. Yor! Namgung shouted, reaching out to his daughter to save her from the Overlord's hands. But he shoved Namgung aside too, and now had the two of them under his control. Manhwa swung his sword and ran to save his family from the hands of the Overlord. "Stop it!" he shouted. But Manhwa has also crashed. He too is under Yor's control. Now he holds the three of them. The only one left on Earth is a little boy who has lost his mother, and from whom Yor wants to take his soul. "Look, I like you, but if your brat crosses the line, she needs to be re-educated, don't you think?" he said to Namgung. "Don't you dare!" Namgung shouted to him, trying to get out of the Overlord's tentacles. "How about 2 lives for summoning the dead after all?" Yor asked. He gave Namgung a choice, either the life of 1 child or the lives of your loved ones. "Only you decide," said the Overlord. "You son of a bitch!" shouted Namgung. Out of Namgung's hands popped the green goblin heart they had gotten by defeating their leader. Yor saw something that fell to the ground. He realized what the object was, and what properties it had. The Lord moved closer to the heart. It began to glow with a bright blue light. A strange smirk appeared on Yor's face. The light became brighter and brighter. Then this light reflected and headed towards Soman. She began to glow with this light. "Ho ho, now that's interesting," Yor said, watching carefully. Namgung realized that Yor had known about Soman's predisposition from the beginning. And this whole circus was on purpose. He lowered his head and said, "Soman, I'm sorry, I want to save at least you. I can't do otherwise." "No, it's not your fault, Dad," said the loving and understanding daughter to her father. "There's no way you'll make the right choice in the future too, Dad." "I believe in you," Soman said, thus reassuring Namgung. Soman's transformation activated. She felt the embrace of her mom Sua on her. Soman is transformed into a magical attribute. She took the whole situation calmly and transformed into a strong mage. After she opened her eyes, they were no longer the same now. Her right eye was blue, and her left eye was red. The mental magic was activated. Namgung watched this extraordinary process carefully. He saw his daughter changing, growing up and becoming stronger. She underwent a complete transformation and gained the strongest magic. Putting her hands together and activating the magic ball, she said, "The only one to blame here is that damned rascal." After accumulating a powerful charge of strength, she shouted and struck the Overlord with all her might. But Soman's strength wasn't enough to defeat such a strong mage. The Lord of the 7 Serpents was only slightly tickled and amused by this. He easily reflected her magic and directed it at her without even using both hands. "A marvelous child. It's the highest level." "No, it's mythical," Yor said, squeezing Soman's strength in his hand. "Namgung, this child is even more interesting than you," he complimented, releasing them all from the embrace of the tentacles. "Hear this, Yor," Namgung appealed before he could get up from the ground. "Don't move," Soman said in a fragile, uncertain voice. She was already very tired, as she had used up a powerful charge of her energy, and drops of sweat were already dripping down her face. Her strength was already running out, her eyes began to darken, and she felt dizzy, after which she collapsed to the ground due to energy exhaustion. Mental magic requires quite a lot of mana. For a child who has just awakened his magical power, it's too much, Yor explained. He squatted down beside Soman and helped her speed up her recovery. "Yor!" shouted Namgung and ran toward them to keep him from taking his daughter. "Don't you dare touch my daughter. I don't care who you are. I will finish you off," Namgung said threateningly. "Oh, relax, no harm done. I'm just trying to help her," Yor said. The Overlord relieved Soman of her pain and helped her calm down after such an excess of strength. "You should thank her. The higher creatures were pleased with this development, so they will let you get away with it," Yor said to Namgung. Namgung picked up his daughter from the ground, took her in his arms, and continued to listen to Yor. "From now on, remember, you'll have to protect her not only from monsters, but also from the higher creatures that have taken a fancy to her," the Lord said. "And you, as my patron, are going to sit idly by, are you?" Namgung asked. Yor threw the Goblin Citadel crystal core at Namgung's feet. It looked like a red crystal ball. "This item was a reward for mopping up the Goblin Citadel," said the Overlord. The high creatures had planned to give Namgung away after the carnival, but Yor managed to intercept him in time. "Your patron isn't so bad in the end, say?" Yor muttered with a smirk. "He will continue to watch Namgung, and he should stay alive for the Lord's victory." Namgung took Soman in his arms, and with a serious look, guided his patron into his magic portal. Soman opened her eyes and realized she had woken up in the back seat in her father's car. "What happened?" she asked, rising from her seat. "I remember fighting what's-his-name, Yor," complimented Soman. Sitting behind the wheel of the car was her uncle, Manhwa. "Soman, you overdid it and passed out," he explained. Ah, I see. Wait, what about that kid? She asked. You mean Hosen? Your dad took him to Daejeon's hideout, said Manhwa. As soon as Somin heard this, she started pulling her daddy's hair and screamed, What? I told you to take him with you. He'll be much safer in the shelter than with us, Namgung replied. Thanks to military man Jin Soo-hek, the Daejeon shelter is the safest place in South Korea. I entrusted him to Jin from Taejeon. We are long-time acquaintances. I trust him. Don't worry about Hosun, he's in good hands, Namgung reassured. But Somin was still resentful of him. If that shelter is so safe, then where are we even going? Somin asked snidely. Together, they all travel to Seoul. After closing the first gates of hell, a new so-called dungeon will rumble in Seoul. This city is controlled by demon magic. If we are to avert the coming disaster, we need rewards for these dungeons, said Namgung, looking at the road through the window. Somin was lonely and sad about what was happening to the world right now, and the fact that she couldn't fully fight yet. When they were approaching Seoul, they saw a lot of burned cars. The city was going through hell. Brother Namgung, you're like a prophet, just like in the scriptures, a man chosen by God. So what are we supposed to do? Manhwa asked, looking at the whole not-so-nice picture going on in the city. It's nothing special, just getting stronger, replied Namgung. That was their main mission. It was deep into the night, a full moon even. They were driving on the road to Seoul and passing near broken-down cars, some of them blistered, some on fire. They had a local radio playing in their car. Listening to it, they heard that the train service had been suspended due to damaged tracks, and the Paju Expressway was closed due to the destruction of the Seosin Junction. Bro, it looks like it's going to be a bit difficult to drive on the highway. It's okay for me because I'm a strong man, but Somin is coming with us. Shouldn't we take the main road? Said Manhwa, looking carefully at the road ahead. Manhun's eyes widened dramatically. Before he could finish the swap sentence, he abruptly wanted to slow down. How someone crashed into them against the windshield, thereby shattering it, because they flew in at a very high speed. They had to stop. It was a bloody goblin. What the? Somin, are you okay? Manhwa asked. Namgung was a little embarrassed by this. Were there really still those green-faced ones left? He stopped and heard something behind him, as if someone was after him. Behind him ran a goblin who wanted to kill him, swinging his knife. But then suddenly he was saved by a guy with a bow, firing one of his arrows at the goblin. Sorry, it's just that the monsters suddenly ran at you, said the boy who saved Namgung. He looked just like Somin, had cute round glasses and a green bow and arrow. Put the bow down first, then talk, Namgung said menacingly. I'm sorry, the boy replied uncertainly, lowering his eyes downward. Did you kill them? Namgung asked, looking at the goblin corpses lying in the middle of the road. Yes, he replied. Wow, that's some marksmanship. It's past midnight and you're hitting vital points, Manhwa said as he opened the car door. It certainly surprised Namgung that an ordinary civilian had finished off 5 monsters using a single bow, and why he didn't remember anything about him in his past life. What's your name? He asked. I'm Yong Kennen, replied the guy from the road in an unsure voice. After getting out of the car, Manhwa asked the guy, What are you doing in the middle of all this mess? The TV clearly said to stay in the houses. I need to get to Seoul. My father stayed at the Tamo hospital and I can't get in touch with him at all, Jung explained. Now Namgung realized why he hadn't met him in his previous life. Even a talented Mac like Somin hadn't managed to survive, let alone him. Just go back home, Namgung said. You can't get to Integrity on a bike like that. You will die, Namgung explained to him. Then help me, I beg you. Give me a ride, I'll pay for it, asked Jung. Will you pay for it? Namgung interjected interestedly. They needed money. I'll give you this. I don't know what it is, but it appeared after killing the monsters, Chong said, holding out the purple stone. A rock? Look, kid, me and my brother don't dabble in diamonds, said Manhwa. Namgung grabbed his brother's hand and said, Wait! Did he show up after killing the goblins? It's always best to have a stash to spare, right, little brother? Manhwa asked. This stone was yet to appear, according to Namgung's memories from his past life. They took the boy with them and drove on down the Olympic Expressway. You're not lying, are you? Namgung asked. Of course not. It really fell off the goblin, said Chong confidently. At this time, Namgung was scrutinizing this stone. It wasn't a stone at all, but a rune of dexterity. There are 2 ways to gain power during Carnival. Develop a gift like Somin did, or pump up statistical performance like Jung did. A gift is a special talent that children get from birth. But, and statistical, it is something that anyone can get if they work to develop it. Runes are a unique item that can be used to instantly augment these stats. In the world of mages, they are in high demand. The chance of getting this rune is minimal, but never zero. Is it that rare? Chan asked. Namgung thought for a moment that perhaps it wasn't simple luck. Where did you learn archery? Namgung asked suspiciously, turning around at their new acquaintance. My father is a national archery champion. He's the one who taught me. At the moment, he's bedridden because of one incident, replied Zhong sadly. National champion. If his last name is Zhong and he's from the national shooting team, Menhun began to think back. His name is Zhong Taiho. Namgung assumed so. In Namgung's previous life, he was a rune master. He also possessed an extremely rare gift that only he and one other girl, Anna Lian, had. World resistance organizations competed with each other to recruit him. But Taiho was comatose for 7 years after one situation. Many people tried to bring him back to normal. Saint Era, one of the 8 battle stars, spent a lot of money to make a special healing elixir for him. Contrary to her title, she's a vicious and vengeful person. She ends up killing Zhong Taiho for refusing to join their group. Namgung had clearly decided for himself that things would be different in this life, and he would try to save as many people as possible. So, bro, where should I go? To the hospital? Menhun asked. No, let's stop somewhere first, he replied. Chong Jr. heard this and said, I beg your pardon. Didn't you promise to take me to my father? What if we are late and something bad happens to him? Nothing bad will happen, don't worry, Namgung said, reassuring the boy. Given the situation, Korea is conducting a rescue operation en masse, utilizing all available forces, including the army and firefighters. In times like these, preservation. Medical facilities are given top priority, Namgung explained. So the hospital would be even safer now than the kind of road they were stuck on. They needed to put their heads together. What do you mean? Zhong asked. We can heal your father with the elixir, said Namgung. Chan was very surprised by this, for he didn't understand how his father could be helped by some potion. The price of such an elixir is 400,000 heads. So far, such a price seems just out of reach, but Namgung will try his best to help the guy. But you're lucky Chan Kanin, we're just heading to the dungeon, said Menhun, encouraging Kenan. Somin explained that this is the second time her dad has lived, so he knows everything. If you listen to Namgung, everything is bound to work out. Kenan was surprised that her dad was living for the second time. Even if we put our heads together, where can we even buy this elixir? Chan asked, as strange as it sounded to him. It isn't long before they discover a place where they can purchase something that will save Namgung's longtime acquaintance. On the clock in the car, the time stopped abruptly with strange numbers. There were 55 hours and 55 minutes. A bright yellow beam struck from the heavens, causing part of the road in front of them to collapse. Everyone in the car was startled by such a blow from above. No one realized what was happening. Namgung had expected this turn of events, and was ready to act decisively. There were many wrecked cars on the road. One of the wheels had a foot on one of the wheels, and it had horns and missing eyeballs in its eye sockets. The people in the cars that were driving down that road didn't realize what this monster in front of them was. Humans, I'll be brief, so listen carefully, the demon said, laughing at the common mortals. From now on, ordinary people are participants in the carnival. The organizers of the carnival will be the phases, they will choose the prophets. Some people tried to run away. Some were wondering who was talking to them and telling them what to do. The demon was angered by the noise from all the people's mouths. He shouted for them all to shut up. After he was beyond angry, he let out a roar of yaksha and all the people flew off and fell on the road. That roar was so powerful that afterward the asphalt melted and left a deep mark in the road. Don't you know it's rude to interrupt? He said, wiping his mouth from drooling. All the information people would need would be automatically embedded in their minds, so Yaksha didn't go into details much. Yaksha started explaining the rules of the carnival to everyone. All the people listened to him attentively. But then he was interrupted by someone who started honking during his speech. It was Menhun. Namgung got out of the car and showed himself to Yaksha. He appeared before him in his own form, hoping that he could defeat him because he knew how to do it. Namgung decided to get straight to the point and said, "Let's keep it short." He didn't like long preambles. Yaksha recognized his old acquaintance in that brown cloak and with that same stubborn voice. "Stop talking," said Namgung. "Is this the Yaksha you were talking about?" "He looks stronger than the goblins," said Menhun fearfully. Yaksha was pissed off that he was being sown to be compared to stupid green-faced monsters. He walked over to Namgung, took him by the shoulder, and said quietly in his ear, "How did you know I was here? Please spare my dignity. There are too many gawkers here." Namgung wanted heads, so he asked Yakshu to empty his pockets, and including his heart bag. "We haven't even signed a contract yet, and you already want my heart bag?" Yaksha asked, surprised. "Would you prefer to give me the elixir?" Namgung asked. But Yaksha knew how much it cost, and realized that his friend didn't have anywhere near that much. Yaksha couldn't do this as this rule violation could jeopardize him. Given that the carnival had started, Zhang and Menhun watched their conversation, and Zhang asked, "Why is he talking to that monster so easily?" Menhun explained that Namgung was living for the second time, and it was an old acquaintance of his. While Namgung and Yaksha tried to negotiate their deal, Menhun tried to explain to Chan who his brother even was. They saw Namgung saying goodbye to his friend. Apparently they had agreed on something after all. Soman wondered what they had been talking about for so long. But his father, as always, was not verbose. They just haggled, and he bought survival items. Namgung looked at the city and saw that they were going nowhere, and needed to save the city. The whole city was on fire, and there was a blue dome on the bridge. The dome was electrically charged, and it was protecting something. Chan gripped his head and began to feel a terrible headache. Yaksha group, armor, dungeon. All the explanations about the carnival suddenly entered my mind. "What's going on?" he asked. Namgung explained that the Yaksha he'd seen earlier was the one who implanted the basic information about the carnival into people's heads. It was his responsibility to organize the opening ceremony. This information threw Chan into awe. She couldn't believe that it was really true, and Namgung was living his life for the second time. Menhun asked his brother what they should do with the car, leave it here, or move it somewhere else. "No, Menhun, you ride her," said Namgung, taking off his cloak. "Can we drive into the dungeon in a car?" Menhun asked angrily, to coolly drive up to the green-faced men. "No, you're going to Shinchan. The exit of the dungeon is there, so meet me as soon as I'm done," said Menhun, rummaging around in the trunk of the car. Namgung wanted to take the children with him, and instructed Menhong to stay back and go to another city. In this city, a large-scale battle called Troublesome Time will take place. You should have realized by now that a fixed number of monsters appear from the gates of hell. Even if you quickly close the gates, those monsters will still descend upon the city. Such an event is called a troubled time. After hearing this, Menhun realized that even if they managed to close the gates of hell, people would still be in danger. Menhun has a big responsibility on his shoulders, to protect as many people as possible. "Bro, leave it to me," he said, rejoicing at the assignment he had received. Namgung realized that the losses that would occur during this apocalypse were inevitable. You shouldn't miss the opportunity to make a lot of goals at once. He needed to buy the elixir, and it was a good opportunity to gain the trust of the rune master Chan Taeho. "We'll try to clear the dungeon quickly and join you right away," Namgung said, putting on his already black jacket so as not to stand out too much. Soman and Keenan went with him. In order to collect as many heads as possible, you have to kill more monsters. Chan was a master of his craft, and used his bow to hit the monsters directly in the head. Soman wasn't far behind either, and used all her mental magic to kill the zombies. "Magic, wow! Really sorcery?" Kenan said, surprised. He had never seen such a thing before. The familiar reality for little Chan was over. "Dad, why didn't you tell me there were zombies in the dungeon? It's just like The Walking Dead," Soman said. "Cereal? Soman, how can you react so calmly to zombies like that?" Kenan asked. "Come on, who's afraid of zombies these days? They're a walking meme. I've been through so many games with them," replied Soman. "Games, you say? Some popular games? I'm not very good at them," said Zhang. Soman was talented at computer games, even more so with zombies. "I can count on my fingers those who are better than me. Only one flume comes to mind. Dungeons like this are too easy," she said. "Soman, don't overdo it. You might catch an overload like last time," said Dad. Salman didn't like it, of course, but she must obey her dad. From around the corner they saw a large cluster of zombies. They were thinking of a plan to kill them all. Namgung handed the matter over to Kenan. He was ready for this battle. Kenan is very fast and accurate. In just a couple seconds, 3 zombies were already with arrows in their heads. Every shot is exactly on the head. "You weren't going to become a professional athlete like your father, were you?" Namgung asked admiringly. Chan revealed that he didn't want to be an athlete. He suddenly became good at shooting with the appearance of the goblins. It was as if he began to see the target much closer. Namgung wondered if that was what his gift was. He had thought that Kenan's gift would be related to runes like his father's. "Has anything else changed?" Namgung asked. Kenan didn't know exactly, but he felt something in him change. When he was sure of it, he would tell. Suddenly, Soman discerned something at the end of the dungeon and poked her finger there. It was the reward chest. It glowed with purple light as always. But there were still a bunch of zombies ahead. Activating all her power, Soman split her into two and walked forward to retrieve the chest. Namguna tried to stop his daughter, for she did not know what was next, and walked confidently forward. Soman had almost already reached the end of the dungeon, her strength growing more and more powerful. Her father was living his second life, and he knew what was about to happen go. But Soman couldn't hear him over the explosion. If Namgung remembered correctly, there was a trap in this dungeon. He ordered Kennen to quickly shoot the chest to save his daughter. Meanwhile, Kennen was already aiming for the chest to fulfill Namgung's errands. Soman, in her euphoria, heard nothing that her loved ones were shouting to her, and here she was already a centimeter away from the chest. Namgung was right, it wasn't a chest at all, but a bomb that exploded. "So mine!" shouted her father, but everyone's ears were covered from the explosion, and there was a lot of smoke. He couldn't see her. Amidst the thick smoke, they began to discern a Somin-like silhouette. Yes, it was her, but her hair was funny. It started to look like an afro hairstyle. "And what was that?" she asked. "Thank God you're in one piece," said Namgung, running to his daughter to hug her tighter. "It's a dungeon trap. Thanks to Kennen, you were able to avoid a direct hit. But if you had opened it, you would have died immediately," Namgung explained. "Dead? What a jerk. This kind of thing should be warned in advance," Kennen said, angry at Namgung.